Nobody in that arena truly understood what they were about to witness. This wasn't just a fight. This wasn't just two men. This was Bruce Lee, standing across from Chuck Norris. Two legends, two philosophies, two completely different ideas of power. Chuck Norris was known for one thing: raw strength. Undefeated, physically dominant, a man people believed could not be stopped once he moved forward. Bruce Lee, on the other hand, didn't look intimidating. He looked calm, relaxed, almost unconcerned. Some even thought he was overconfident. But what most people didn't realize was this: Bruce Lee never measured fights by size. He measured them by timing. As the two men faced each other, the room fell silent. No cheers, no noise. Just tension. Chuck cracked his knuckles, confident that power would decide everything. Bruce didn't move. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He simply watched. And in that moment, before a single strike was thrown, history was already leaning in one direction. Because Bruce Lee knew something everyone else was about to learn the hard way. The fight wouldn't be long, and it wouldn't need more than one round. If you believe real power comes from control, type LITIGACY in the comments. The moment Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris stepped into position, the atmosphere changed. This wasn't the kind of silence that comes from respect alone. It was the silence that comes when people sense something irreversible is about to happen. Chuck Norris stood tall in the center of the floor, broad shoulders, tight stance, every muscle ready. He had the look of a man who had never doubted the outcome of a fight. Years of victories had carved confidence into his posture. When Chuck fought, he overwhelmed. He pressed forward, absorbed damage, and ended things with power. That was his reputation, and everyone in the room knew it. Across from him, Bruce Lee looked different, not weaker, just lighter. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground. His shoulders were relaxed. His hands hung loose, not clenched. To some in the crowd, it looked like indifference. To trained eyes, it was something else entirely: efficiency. Bruce wasn't preparing to collide. He was preparing to move. The referee glanced between them, sensing the tension. No theatrics, no trash talk. Just two men waiting for the signal. Chuck shifted his weight slightly forward, already planning to dominate the center. Bruce noticed it instantly. He noticed everything: the angle of Chuck's hips, the tension in his calves, the way his breathing slowed as he prepared to explode. Most fighters react. Bruce anticipated. The signal came. Chuck took the first step, heavy and deliberate, closing distance the way he always did. He wanted Bruce close, wanted to test whether speed could survive pressure. The crowd leaned in, expecting the clash. But Bruce didn't meet force with force. He glided sideways just enough to change the angle. Repositioning. Chuck adjusted, surprised not by the movement, but by how little effort it took Bruce to make him miss space he thought he controlled. Chuck pressed again, more aggressively this time. Another step, another attempt to impose strength. Bruce responded with a subtle shift of his feet, eyes locked, expression unchanged. No wasted motion, no panic, no hesitation. With every step Chuck took, Bruce gathered information. Distance. Rhythm, timing. Bruce wasn't fighting yet. He was reading. The crowd started to sense it. This wasn't turning into the brawl they expected. There were no wild exchanges, no explosive openings, just movement, observation, control. Chuck threw a probing strike. Not full power, but enough to test reactions. Bruce slipped past it as if he had seen it seconds earlier. His counter stopped just short of contact, a message more than an attack. Chuck blinked. That was new. He had fought fast men before, strong men too. But this felt different. This felt like chasing something that refused to be where he wanted it. Bruce reset his stance, still calm, still loose. His breathing never changed. The fight clock had barely begun, but momentum was already shifting. The crowd didn't cheer. They whispered. Because they were starting to understand something unsettling. This wasn't about who hit harder. It wasn't about who looked stronger. It was about who controlled the space between them. And with every second that passed, it became clearer. Bruce Lee wasn't reacting to Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris was reacting to Bruce Lee. And once that happens in a fight, there is only one possible ending. At first, Chuck Norris didn't feel threatened. He had been in too many fights, too many competitions to be shaken by movement alone. Speed was impressive, yes, but speed faded. Power didn't. That was what Chuck believed. It was what had carried him through every opponent who tried to dance around him instead of meeting him head-on. Bruce Lee was fast. Chuck could admit that. But fast didn't mean dangerous. Not yet. Chuck circled again, widening his stance, grounding himself. He wanted to slow the pace, force Bruce into a corner, make the fight physical. His shoulders rolled as he loosened up, eyes locked on Bruce's center line. He was waiting for impatience, for Bruce to overcommit, to try something flashy. Bruce never did. Instead, he mirrored Chuck's movement just enough to stay unpredictable. His feet whispered across the floor, barely lifting, barely landing. His posture stayed upright, relaxed, almost casual. To someone unfamiliar with combat, it looked like confidence. To Chuck, it looked like restraint. And restraint can feel like disrespect. Chuck feinted forward, testing again. Bruce didn't bite, he didn't flinch. He simply shifted his weight and let the distance remain exactly where he wanted it. Chuck frowned. That was the first crack. He increased the pressure, stepping in harder now. Throwing a strike meant to force a reaction. Bruce slipped it effortlessly, so close that Chuck could feel air move where Bruce had been. Then something unexpected happened. Bruce smiled. Not a grin, not arrogance. Just a brief, calm expression like a man who had just confirmed a theory. Chuck noticed, and in that moment, the fight stopped being purely physical. Because fighters know something most spectators don't. When your opponent smiles in the middle of danger, it means they're comfortable. Chuck felt it in his chest, not fear, but irritation. The kind that makes you want to end things quickly. He told himself Bruce was playing games. That speed couldn't last forever. That eventually Bruce would have to stand still long enough to be hit. So Chuck pushed. Harder now. He closed distance aggressively, throwing combinations designed to overwhelm, to back Bruce up, to erase that calm. The crowd finally reacted, gasps, murmurs, shifting in their seats. Bruce retreated a half step, then stopped. That pause mattered. Chuck saw it and took it as an opening. This was it, he thought. The moment where strength breaks rhythm. He committed. But Bruce had already moved, inside the attack, not away from it. His motion was so sharp, so efficient, that it barely registered until it was over. A light contact. Nothing that looked decisive, but Chuck felt it, not pain. Something worse, disruption. His balance shifted just enough to remind him that he wasn't in control. His foot landed slightly off. His timing slipped by a fraction of a second. Bruce stepped back into range, still calm, still watching. That was the second crack. Chuck reset, breathing heavier now. Not from exhaustion, but from tension. He had expected dominance by now. Instead, he was working, thinking, adjusting. And the more he adjusted, the more Bruce learned. Bruce saw the pattern forming. The way Chuck leaned before striking. The way his shoulders tightened before committing power. The rhythm beneath the aggression. Bruce wasn't guessing anymore. He was calculating. Chuck threw another attack, sharper this time, frustration leaking into his movement. Bruce intercepted it, not forcefully, just enough to redirect the line. Chuck's arm was suddenly not where he thought it was. The crowd felt it. Something had changed. This wasn't Bruce avoiding the fight anymore. This was Bruce inviting mistakes. Chuck hesitated for the first time, just a beat. But in a fight, a beat is everything. Bruce saw it instantly. And in that moment, Chuck Norris realized something that no opponent had ever forced him to realize before. He wasn't being tested. He was being studied. Bruce Lee wasn't trying to win fast. He was waiting for certainty. Waiting for the exact second when Chuck would stop thinking and start reacting emotionally. And Chuck, despite all his discipline, felt it rising. The urge to finish this, to assert himself, to remind everyone why he was feared. That urge was the trap. Because Bruce Lee didn't need anger. He needed timing. And the moment Chuck let frustration guide even a single movement, Chuck Norris had never no longer belonged to the fighter who froze. He was decisive, aggressive. When something felt off, he corrected it with pressure. And now, with the crowd watching and momentum slipping through his fingers, pressure was exactly what he chose. He advanced again. Faster this time, harder, with intent. The floor echoed under his steps as he closed distance, throwing a powerful combination meant to force Bruce into defense. This wasn't probing anymore. This was Chuck asserting himself, reminding everyone that strength still mattered. For the first time, Bruce moved backward more than a half step. The crowd reacted instantly. Some leaned forward. Some held their breath. This looked like the moment the fight would finally ignite. Chuck pressed, following Bruce, cutting angles, forcing him toward the edge of the space. He wanted Bruce boxed in. Limited slowed. Power works best when there's nowhere to run, but Bruce wasn't running. He was positioning. Every retreat was measured, every step placed with purpose. His eyes never left Chuck's center. His breathing stayed steady. To anyone watching closely, it was clear. Bruce wasn't overwhelmed. He was waiting. Chuck threw a heavy strike, then another, each one carrying more commitment than the last. Bruce blocked one, slipped the next, absorbed the pressure without panic. The sound of impact echoed through the room, sharp and final. This was real now. No more testing, no more reading. The fight had crossed into a different phase. Chuck felt a surge of confidence as he finally made contact. Not clean, not decisive, but enough to remind himself that Bruce could be touched. He pushed harder, letting instinct take over, believing this was the moment to break the rhythm once and for all. That belief was exactly what Bruce had been waiting for. As Chuck stepped in again, his weight shifted forward just a fraction too much. His shoulders tightened, his focus narrowed. He was no longer observing, he was chasing. Bruce saw it instantly. Time seemed to compress, not slow, not stop, but sharpen. Bruce didn't think, he didn't plan. He acted on everything he had already learned. In one sudden movement, Bruce stepped inside the attack. Not backward, not sideways, inside. Chuck's strike passed where Bruce had been a split second earlier. Bruce's body rotated smoothly, redirecting force rather than colliding with it. A sharp, precise counter followed, not thrown with anger, not thrown with power, but with perfect placement. The sound wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Chuck staggered a step. The crowd erupted, not in cheers but in shock. That wasn't supposed to happen. Chuck reset quickly, pride flaring. He had absorbed harder shots before. This wasn't about damage. It was about control, and for the first time he felt it slipping away. Bruce was closer now, no longer retreating, standing right in front of him, focused, unrushed. Chuck attacked again, trying to reclaim dominance, but something had changed. His strikes were heavier, less precise. Bruce's movements, on the other hand, became sharper, more decisive. Each exchange tilted the balance further. Bruce intercepted a strike and answered immediately. A quick combination, efficient, direct, and impossible to predict. Chuck blocked one, missed another, felt the third land clean enough to force him back. Just one step. But that step mattered. The room felt it. This was no longer a contest of equals. Bruce wasn't reacting anymore, he was leading. Chuck's breathing deepened. His muscles tightened. He was still dangerous, still powerful, but now he was chasing a rhythm that no longer belonged to him. Bruce paused for half a second. Not because he was tired, because he had found what he was looking for. The opening. Everything Chuck had done, the pressure, the aggression, the frustration, had narrowed his options. His movements had become predictable. His timing exposed. Bruce adjusted his stance slightly. The crowd went silent again. Everyone sensed it. This wasn't building anymore. This was about to end. Chuck stepped forward once more, determined to force the issue, unaware that the tension he felt wasn't rising anymore. It was peaking, and when tension peaks in a fight like this, what follows isn't chaos, it's clarity. The opening didn't arrive loudly, it arrived quietly. So quietly that most people didn't realize what they were witnessing until it was already unfolding. Chuck Norris stepped forward again, driven by instinct more than strategy now. He was still dangerous, still powerful, but the edge had dulled. His movements carried commitment without calculation. He wanted to finish this exchange, to reclaim momentum before it slipped away completely. Bruce Lee saw everything. The shift in weight, the tightening of the shoulders, the moment Chuck chose force over timing. That choice lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Bruce stepped in, not with hesitation, not with explosion, with certainty. His foot landed exactly where it needed to be, closing distance while opening angles. Chuck's strike came down with full intent, but Bruce wasn't there anymore. He rotated smoothly, guiding the force past him as if redirecting water rather than resisting impact. And then, Bruce struck, not wildly, not emotionally. One precise movement flowed into the next. A sharp counter landed cleanly, followed by a controlled sequence that left no room for recovery. Each action was connected, efficient, inevitable. Chuck tried to adjust, but his balance betrayed him. The disruption Bruce had planted earlier now fully revealed itself. His footing slipped just enough, his timing fractured just enough. In a fight at this level, just enough is everything. The crowd reacted in waves, first confusion, then realization. This wasn't a back and forth anymore. This was a lesson. Bruce maintained pressure without aggression. He didn't rush. He didn't chase. He stayed close enough to deny space, far enough to avoid counters. Chuck swung again, heavier now, hoping power could still change the outcome. Bruce answered before the motion finished. A clean strike, a redirection, a final adjustment of position. Chuck staggered, not violently, decisively. The room went silent again, not from shock this time, but from understanding. This was over. Bruce took a step back, not because he was done fighting, but because the fight no longer needed to continue. He stood still, composed, eyes focused, breathing steady. Chuck regained his footing, but the fire was gone. The confidence that had defined him at the start of the round had drained away, replaced by something far more honest. Respect. The referee moved in. The signal was clear. One round, that was all it took. No dramatic collapse. No unnecessary damage. Just a definitive end. Bruce lowered his hands and turned slightly away, already finished with the moment. For him, the fight had ended the instant the outcome became certain. The crowd finally erupted, not with wild cheering, but with something deeper. Awe. Disbelief. Recognition. They hadn't just watched a fight. They had witnessed a shift. Bruce Lee didn't celebrate. He didn't posture. He didn't look back for validation. He simply walked away as calmly as he had walked in, because the point had never been to dominate. It had been to demonstrate. That speed, when guided by understanding, outpaces strength. That control dismantles aggression. That clarity ends conflict faster than force ever could. Chuck Norris stood still for a moment longer, absorbing what had happened. He hadn't been humiliated. He hadn't been overwhelmed by brute violence. He had been outthought, outtimed, outmaneuvered. And in that realization, history was written. That single round became more than a result. It became a reference point. A moment fighters would study. A lesson teachers would repeat. Proof that martial arts wasn't about who hit harder, but who understood movement, timing, and restraint at the deepest level. From that day forward, the conversation changed. Not who is stronger, but who is smarter in motion. And at the center of that question stood Bruce Lee. Calm, precise, unforgettable. The fight ended quickly, but what it created lasted forever. Long after the crowd dispersed and the noise faded, people kept talking, not about how hard Bruce Lee hit, but about how little he needed to. That single round became more than a result. It became a reference point. A moment that quietly rewrote how combat, discipline, and strength were understood. Because what Bruce Lee demonstrated wasn't dominance, it was mastery. He didn't win by overwhelming Chuck Norris with force. He didn't rely on size, intimidation, or brute power. Instead, he showed something far rarer, what happens when control is absolute. Fighters watching that moment noticed details most people missed. The calm breathing, the relaxed shoulders, the absence of wasted motion. Bruce wasn't reacting to chaos. He was operating inside clarity. Every movement had purpose. Every action ended exactly where it needed to. That was the lesson. Strength alone had limits. Speed alone faded. But understanding, true understanding, changed everything. Martial arts schools around the world began to shift their thinking. Training philosophies evolved. The idea that size determined outcomes lost its grip. Instead, teachers emphasized timing, distance, awareness, and control. Bruce Lee didn't just win a fight. He elevated a mindset. Chuck Norris, too, understood what had happened. There was no bitterness, no excuses, only recognition. He had faced something different, something that couldn't be pressured, rushed, or forced. And that kind of opponent doesn't humiliate you. It humbles you. That's why the moment remains respected rather than controversial. There was no mockery, no excessive celebration, just mutual acknowledgement of skill and clarity. Two warriors, one outcome, and a shared understanding of what truly matters. Bruce Lee never spoke about the fight as a conquest. He didn't need to. His philosophy had already explained it long before the round ever happened. Using no way as way, having no limitation as limitation. That wasn't poetry, it was practice. The fight became a living example of that idea: flow over rigidity, adaptability over force, calm over chaos. Bruce didn't defeat Chuck Norris by breaking him. He defeated the problem Chuck represented, the belief that power alone decides outcomes. And that belief didn't survive the round. Years later, people still replay the moment in their minds. Not because it was violent, but because it was clean, because it felt inevitable, because once it ended, it made perfect sense. That's how true mastery looks: quiet, efficient, final. Bruce Lee walked away from that moment the same way he entered it: centered. He didn't need applause. He didn't need validation. The lesson had already landed, and maybe that's why the moment still resonates today. In a world obsessed with being loud, aggressive, and dominant, Bruce Lee showed something more powerful. Self-control, awareness, precision, the ability to end conflict without becoming consumed by it. That is why history remembers the round, not as a fight, but as a statement. Decades have passed since that round ended. The world has changed. Martial arts have evolved. Fighters are faster, stronger, more conditioned than ever before. And yet, that moment still refuses to fade. People still argue about it, still analyze it, still replay it frame by frame. searching for the reason it felt different from every other fight they've seen. Because on the surface it looked simple. One round, one outcome. One man walking away calm while the other stood processing what had just happened. But underneath that simplicity was something deeper. Bruce Lee didn't just defeat an opponent. He exposed an illusion. The illusion that dominance comes from force, that intimidation equals control, that the loudest presence wins. That round shattered those ideas quietly, but completely. Modern fighters often speak about flow state, about being so present that thought disappears and action becomes effortless. Bruce Lee was demonstrating that decades before the term became popular. He wasn't reacting in real time. He was operating ahead of time. Every movement Chuck made existed in Bruce's awareness before it fully happened. Not because Bruce was supernatural, but because he had stripped away everything unnecessary. Fear, ego, tension, expectation. What remained was clarity, and clarity is terrifying to face. That's why the moment still resonates beyond martial arts. People who've never thrown a punch understand it intuitively. They recognize the power of someone who doesn't rush, doesn't panic, doesn't need to prove anything. In business, in leadership, in life. The calmest person in the room often holds the real advantage. Bruce Lee embodied that truth long before it became a motivational quote. He lived it, trained it, demonstrated it when it mattered most. And that's why the round still matters today. Because it wasn't about winning. It was about showing a better way. Look at how conflict is usually handled: escalation, ego, reaction. Someone pushes back harder. Voices rise, stakes increase, damage follows. Bruce Lee offered an alternative. Understand first, position second, act only when action is inevitable. That philosophy doesn't just end fights, it prevents them. Even Chuck Norris's response over time reflected that understanding. There was no bitterness attached to the moment, only acknowledgement. Because when you're defeated by power, you argue. When you're defeated by clarity, you learn. That's why the moment became timeless rather than controversial. It didn't divide people, it educated them. Today's fighters study that round not to copy techniques, but to absorb principles. Economy of motion, emotional neutrality, tactical patience. The idea that the goal isn't to dominate an opponent, but to solve a problem efficiently. And that idea has aged better than any highlight, real knockout ever could. Because knockouts fade, principles don't. Bruce Lee's legacy isn't preserved in trophies or titles. It's preserved in how people think when pressure rises, in the pause before reaction, in the decision to remain calm when chaos would be easier. That's why his influence stretches far beyond the mat. He didn't just change how people fought. He changed how people approached difficulty. And that single round against Chuck Norris became the clearest expression of that mindset, compressed into seconds, but echoing across generations. The reason it still matters is simple. It reminds us that the highest level of power doesn't look violent, it looks controlled. If you had to choose under pressure, would you rely on strength or clarity?